Mr. Speaker, we believe that identity always develops. And what is important is the autonomy of this identity. We believe that because language is a very important part which cultivates the type of identity, we must always follow the demands of these people who are assimilated or a part of an identity. That is why the government must never actively intervene in the development of a certain type of identity. And that is why we believe this motion must stand. I'm going to talk about two things in my speech. First of all, I'm going to talk about the development of identity and how language is relevant to this. And second of all, I'm going to talk about how active protection by the government will harm these people. But before moving on to my points, let me clarify our model. So we're going to stop all types of intervention or all types of protection of a language. This might be a subsidy towards a certain type of language, or it might be an active establishing active institutions which prioritize or which enhances the use of a language. And yes, we're going to stop all those types of intervention in languages. So let me go into my point. First of all, the development of an identity. We believe that identity, no thank you, always changes, meaning that what you want to be or what type of race you want to be part of, no thank you, or what you need to maximize the happiness of your life changes relevant to how society changes, right? We believe it means that how strong you want to be segregated from a certain type of majority identity or how much you want to integrate to a certain type of majority population always changes whenever how society works changes. What I mean by how society works is, for example, the level of integration of particular identities within a nation, or how economy is run, or what type of jobs are available out there, what you need to be work to have a certain type of job, etc., or what kind of resources you can access. No, thank you. Yes.
Okay, so do you support the principle in which mainstream languages replace the minor languages?
Yes, that's fine if the language is not demanded. Okay, so society always changes, right? And we believe that the necessity of a language changes relevant to this, which means that how much you need, if you're an Ainu person, how much you need that Ainu language to have an actually beneficial life changes through how society runs in Japan, for example, the type of education or the type of jobs you can access, or how much you need the Maori language if you're living in New Zealand, always changes when the type of education changes, etc. And we believe what we need to recognize here is that if you actually want a type of language to stay in a society, that is possible. You can always protect a language by yourself if you demand that. How dialects are always protected, even if only a minor population speaks the Osaka dialect, it is always protected because it is demanded, and it is protected through how generations continue to use it, or how they gather and continue to educate their own people. We believe that what we need to recognize here is that you can always protect a language by yourself, it is demanded, and the government protection is not necessary. So we believe that the necessity of a language always changes, and what you need to protect a certain type of identity, or what type of identity you want, always changes throughout the development in society. No, thank you. So let me go to my second point, how active protection is going to harm these people. We believe that going against the development or going against the demand of a particular society always harms this. Because what it means that you are not letting these people pursue a certain type of culture that they want to be part of. And we believe that culture is always important to abide the society's demand, because culture is cultivated through societal institutions. No, thank you. Only when that view is shared, and only when these people concede to the view that is shared, will these cultures be passed on, will these cultures be deepened. And we believe that when the government intervenes and actively protects these people throughout subsidy or throughout the enforcing of an education, there is always a forced choice. Because what we're doing here is that we're giving tax money actively, or utilizing these people, and we're going to enforce a certain type of education. And these people who are part of that race, or these people, for example, the Ainu people, or these Maori people, or these Irish people, they're always going to be forced into making that choice of protecting that particular language, because the government is actively enforcing these people. We believe that a lot of people would be swayed in this way. We think this is harmful because you're not allowing these people to pursue a certain type of culture that they want to, and it's going to make it very difficult for them to integrate into society when they want to. We think that's a harm on the first place in these individuals. But moreover, we think that minorities are going to be discriminated further because it gives a sense of message to society that these identities are somehow necessary, but they need active protection by the government. They cannot stand on their own, and they are somehow weaker than any other type of citizen. And we believe that that gives a sense of segregation towards these minor cultures or minor races within a society. We think that is extremely harmful because these people who have a dying language means that these people are people who want to especially integrate into the majority society. And we believe that when a sense of discrimination or a sense of segregation increases, it's going to harm these people and there's going to be further discrimination, for example, how they are viewed in society or what kind of jobs they can access or etc. We think it's much more harmful because it's going to create a division within groups. We think language is a very strong factor that divides society. For example, we have seen in several cases in Yugoslavia or these cases where societies of different languages were never able to integrate and were actually divided. And we think when the demand is not there, we should never integrate. We should never actively protect a certain type of language because it's going to create segregation which is not demanded within society, and it's going to make it extremely difficult for these people to integrate in society. And we think a lot of people are going to be harmed. So what I've told you today is that the demand towards language always changes, and the type of identity that a certain person wants to assimilate themselves always changes. We have said that these identities or these language can always be protected by themselves, and when a government enforces these protection, it's going to go against their choice of them, and it's going to harm their identity severely. And for all those reasons, we are very proud to close.
Prime Minister. Now, to advocate for the opposition,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen, in this House today. Ladies and gentlemen, on the side of the opposition, we agree with the government side that language is very important. Language is a core part of a person's culture. However, we disagree with the notion by the government side that people can always protect their languages and that some languages can be useful in a certain time or place. We believe that all languages must be protected. They must not be allowed to die, and that is why today we are very proud to oppose. So first, I'd like to refute back to what the Prime Minister has said. In her first point, the Prime Minister stated that, well, we can always protect the language. Everyone can just go to a school and learn languages or protect them somehow. However, this is not true. Ladies and gentlemen, the government, these languages that we're talking about, they gave us no clarification on what we're talking about today. But today, the languages we're talking about are languages such as like the Inuit, the Eskimo language, or languages of tribes in India, where they are like 400 different tribes. No, thank you. Or languages in Nepal on top of mountains like the Himalaya mountains where only like 2 people speak it. We believe that these languages are so fragile that they need the assistance of government in order to prolong it, in order to save it for future generations. So we say that their assumption that these languages can always be protected is untrue. And secondly, she stated about how the development of languages rapidly changes and how much you want to change this differs from time to time. However, as I will explain in my first point, we believe that language is always a core part of a person's culture. It pertains to someone's cultural identity. It's part of their ancestry. And we believe that this is extremely important, so we must protect it. Now, secondly, she talked about how this is going to harm people by forcing people to protect a language even if they don't want to. But ladies and gentlemen, their analysis was extremely simple. They just stated that some people, like the Irish people, might not want to protect the Gaelic languages and so on. However, if you think about it, we believe that most people want to protect their languages or dying languages because it's a very important part of their culture. It's not something that you just let go just because you feel like it. So first of all, we don't believe that there are going to be people who feel like they're forced into protecting a language. And secondly, they stated, I'll take it later. they stated the problem about discrimination and how some people are going to be discriminated because they're getting a subsidy from the government. However, ladies and gentlemen, we don't believe that, first of all, this is going to happen because there's no link between giving someone a subsidy and making them extremely weak in the pyramid. And second of all, we believe that even if discrimination should occur, we believe that it's better to give a person a choice whether to pursue to protect that language or to let it die out. So that is why we believe that none of their points stand. Yes, sir.
Okay, you talk an example like where only 2 people speak the language. Don't you think for this excessively minority language, you're simply going to further isolate this community?
No, because we believe that by protecting these languages, even if only 2 people speak it, they can pass on their wisdom and knowledge to their future generations and teach their future generations about their ancestry, how they got there, how they lived their lifestyles, and so on. So therefore, your point doesn't stand. So now I'd like to explain my point. Our first point is about how language is a crucial part of a cultural identity, and our second point is going to be about how the government's help is absolutely necessary in order to preserve these languages. So moving on to my first point. Ladies and gentlemen, today on the opposition side, we'd like to state that languages are extremely important in the aspect of culture because they reveal many, many parts of that culture. For example, like the Inuit language, they have 7 different words for the word sea because it reflects their lifestyle on fishing and hunting in the sea. We believe that languages express how ancestors lived, how they were influenced by other nations, or links to other languages that have already died in time. And we believe that this constructs a large part of the cultural identity, who you are, what your ancestors were like, how you are. However, if we take this time, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to allow languages to die out. We are going to say, well, you're not important anymore. Only like 2 people or several people speak that language, so you can cut it all out. And we say that if you do that, you lose a very large part, a significant portion of your culture. And why is this really important? Because your culture, your identity is tied into a culture. A culture is where you belong somewhere. And you find people who are like you, people who share the same kinds of traits as you, and you start to form your own identity. If we take away language, then you're going to take away a large part of that culture, and you're going to lose who you are. You don't know who you are, where you belong. And we believe that this is extremely harmful to individuals or tribes or nations as a whole. And so that is why today we believe that language should be preserved in order to maintain this cultural identity. So now I'd like to move on to our second point about how we need the state's help in order to preserve languages. Ladies and gentlemen, under the status quo, we are saving these dying languages through government subsidy or government money given to institutions to record tape recordings of these languages spoken by the elders or documentation by researchers or creating institutions where people can learn about these languages. And it takes a lot of money. But we say that this money is being used in a very good way, allocated in a very good way, because government is helping people preserve a language that allows them the minimum standard of communication. Conversing in that language is the means to communicate, and we believe that this is important. However, after this plan is taken, they're going to be no longer, the government is not allowed to intervene in these kinds of problems. And as a result, we say that this is extremely bad because, as I stated in my first point, people are going to lose part of their culture. And also because people are going to feel like they're going to be pressured into speaking a common language such as English. They'll be forced to speak a language. They'll be stripped away of their choice to speak their own language or to find a way to learn about their own culture. And as a result, they're going to be forced into speaking a language that they don't necessarily want to speak. And we say that this is extremely harmful to the person's rights, person's choice to speak their own languages. Today, on the opposition side, we believe that government should protect all kinds of languages, whether they are living or dying, in order to protect a person's cultural identity. And that is why today we are very proud to post. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen. This debate is not just about the importance of language, just the consensus of this debate. It's important to some extent. But this debate is about whether this kind of presumptuous protection or intervention by the state is really benefiting these people, using dying language or not. This is the core matter that we want to talk about on on our side. In order to further continue our case, I'm going to talk about three things. Firstly, does the state have the authority to perpetuate certain type of identity of individuals or groups? Secondly, even if languages are necessary, is language exclusively vital to transcend the culture to the next generation? Thirdly, I'm going to talk about the issue of mainstream language, which is replacing the minority language in the status quo. Refutation to the previous speaker will be incorporated into each issue. Firstly, does the state have the absolute authority to perpetuate certain type of identity of individual or groups, ladies and gentlemen? Two levels of analysis from this side of the house. Firstly, these people have autonomy or sovereignty or right to choose their own language. If these people don't need their own minority languages anymore, they should be allowed to choose another mainstream language in order to get integrated with the civilized society, for example, ladies and gentlemen. No, thank you. The premise on our side is it is possible for these people to preserve minority language by their own efforts. For example, let's look at the dialect which is used by the local prefecture in Japan. This is not the main language anymore, but because there is a strong demand for this kind of dialect, people still use dialects in the status quo, ladies and gentlemen. If the language is spoken or used in a daily basis, that will never disappear. If there is a demand or necessity for that linguistic matter or language, that language will not disappear, ladies and gentlemen. It's a matter of people's choice or willingness to continue to use language or not. Right? Therefore, even if some languages are fragile, it doesn't automatically mean that the state should actively step in and intervene. We should allow people to choose. Secondly, ladies and gentlemen, why this kind of consent is really important, right? This is because protection of the culture should coincide with the will of the people. No, thank you. For example, let's look at the registration of the World Heritage Site. Yeah? If people do not consent, the fact that their own culture should be registered to the World Heritage Site, actually, UNICEF do not register the World Heritage Sites, depriving the autonomy of the people living in those areas, ladies and gentlemen. We believe the language should always be protected according to the will of the people in that particular area. If we forcibly, pressure them to preserve their own language by giving them subsidy or something, there will be two concrete harms we see on our side. Firstly, the unification or consolidation of the nation state would be much harder. Let's look at the case of Yugoslavia or Balkan Peninsula, ladies and gentlemen. The Babel Tower eventually annihilates the whole world. The division or linguistic division eventually leads to the disunification or the conflicts of some territory internally. This is extremely pernicious on our side. But secondly, the identity crisis of these individuals that belong to certain community are so deleterious, ladies and gentlemen, because these people are forced to continue to use their minority language, even if they want to, or maybe want to change their own language or identities, ladies and gentlemen. We think this kind of identity crisis of these minorities are so deleterious that we should not close our eyes. Second issue, before moving on to the second issue, I want to take point of information from your side. Nothing. Okay, move on. Okay.
Do you honestly believe the Japanese dialects are the same as, for example, language spoken by English or other kind of extremely minor populations?
Yeah, we are more than happy to accept that. If there is a strong demand or necessity for that particular language, people will continue to use that language without the government or state intervention. Secondly, is language exclusively vital to transcend the culture to the next generation? Ladies and gentlemen, we acknowledge the fact that language is important to some extent, but that's not the only exclusive way to transcend the culture to the next generation. One, because the culture is not just transcend to the next generation orally or verbally, right? Without verbal or oral explanation, people understand or comprehend the custom, ladies and gentlemen. If, for example, hunting animal is a custom of one community, people will continue to do that. People have already got used to, practicing those customs, ladies and gentlemen, without orally or verbally explain to the children, for example. Children comprehend that culture or custom without listening to the verbal or oral explanation, ladies and gentlemen. No, thank you. But secondly, language itself is not always related to the certain cultural practice. For example, let's look at the culture of tea drinking, for example. It was originated in Britain and it was spread through the British colonialization into African continent. But people in Africa no longer speak English or British language, but they still have the tea culture, ladies and gentlemen. As this example shows that language is not always related to certain cultural practices. Thirdly, the Prime Minister said that all languages should be treated equally, but government does not give subsidy to the mainstream language, ladies and gentlemen. If he accepts their principle, all language should be protected, and the government should spend all capital, lock, stock, and barrel to protect all languages. That's totally ridiculous. We don't think that principle is applicable in any circumstances. Final issue, the issue of mainstream language, which is replacing the minority language. Ladies and gentlemen, the analysis coming from the prime leader of opposition is that the allocation of money is so effective, ladies and gentlemen. The fact is, this kind of allocation of budget does not really represent the will of the people, ladies and gentlemen. In a democratic government, that should represent the majority will of the people, ladies and gentlemen. They might say that mainstream civilized society invaded this minority culture, ladies and gentlemen. But we don't think current generation bear certain moral responsibility towards the past injustice, ladies and gentlemen, because these current generation do not consent to the past injustice perpetrated by the previous generation, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, because there is no correlation between the responsibility that current generation bear towards the invasion perpetrated by the previous generation, we don't think this kind of allocation of the budget is legitimate or justifiable in the first place, ladies and gentlemen. As a consequence, what we emphasize on our side is that the language is always changing. It's related to the evolution of the identity of people within that kind of particular community. Government intervention is just too presumptuous, which is causing the deleterious effects on those communities. We're very proud to propose the motion before the House today. Thank you.
Thank you for calling. Entire government case sincerely believes in the idea that if we expect the demand of certain language always sustains themselves. But on the side of negative, we believe it is totally wrong. It is not always the case. This is the simple reason why we beg to oppose. Because they must be dying in their paradise. In these cases, this creates further deprivation of their fundamental goods, especially the indigenous community. That's why we beg to oppose. Firstly, let me engage with the previous speaker. He mainly talked about three things. Firstly, he talked about that if we expect the necessity or demand from certain communities, that those minor languages is still sustained, giving the example of the dialects in Japan or etc. Firstly, we are not talking about those dialects. It is not always the case, because we, as my partner already told you, those languages we target on the side of negative is fragile, because they need money in the community. They need the subsidy from the government, especially they sustain their language through the document or through the tape record. They never engage this point. No, thank you. And secondly, he talked about they are forced to those subsidies forcing them to sustain their minor language or etc. That's why this caused the identity crisis to certain extent for those countries. Firstly, we are not forcing individual certain community to sustain their minor language. They have the option or choice whether they choose to sustain their life, because they have the option to. We are okay for those communities to decide to reject the subsidy from the government, because they give the choice to sustain their minor language, which is directly connected to their culture or etc. That's why the point is not important in this way. Thirdly, he talked about the unification is difficult if they continue to use their language in the case of Yugoslavia or whatever. So it is three responses. Firstly, we do not see any clear linkage between using a different language and the difficulty of the unification. And secondly, more importantly, the root cause is totally different to cause those segregation. Because in case of Yugoslavia, there is the systematic oppression in the between the ethnicity and between certain ethnicity and other ethnicity. In these cases, for example, in case of the That's why this root cause. That's why those systematic operations cause those antipathy towards between certain ethnicity. In this case, we don't see any problem for that. No, thank you. And thirdly, more importantly, this proposal rather causes further segregation because we deprive of further rights of the minority. That I'm going to extend in my substance. Next, let me enhance my partner's argument. So the deputy prime minister cast the doubt of the government, the assumption from the negative event. The government fund is crucial. Firstly, those government fund is crucial because especially those language connect the nuance or pronunciation. This directly connected with their culture or the climate or climate of land or etc. In these cases, those sustain in this case, the government fund is crucial because those minorities they need to have the monetary support, monetary fund by themselves. In these cases, the government fund is necessary. Yes.
After post-war in Japan, Chinese Koreans gathered themselves in Chinatown and sustained their language. How can you say that every single time minority language can never sustain by themselves?
Okay, firstly, this is not the bottom proof for the negative event. All language destroyed. Because against the will, they are forced to be destroyed. This is the bottom proof of the negative event. In this case, it is so difficult. No, thank you. They thought so the response from the negative event is the family. We do not support the mainstream language. Okay, we accept that because those mainstream language do not need any support from the government in this case because they are already established in the school or through the compulsory education. On the other hand, so we targeting on the side of the negative. The minor language cannot sustain by themselves. If they give as an example of the Korea or whatever. In these cases, firstly, we don't think so because those minor, as my partner already told you, in the case of India or in the case of Spain, for example, in the language of the Basque or in the language of the Valencia or etc. In these cases, they cannot sustain themselves. So why we can say the government support is so crucial? Because language, we believe on the side of negative. Language is just one kind of the minimum standard of their lifestyle. In these cases, as my partner already told you, this connects the cultural identity to how to handle or how to cultivate their land or etc. That's why we can say language is minimum standard. Government should support it. So when we start thinking about how this proposal rather undermines the mutual understanding of the minority Indian community. No, thank you. So in the status quo, what is going to happen? Even in the status quo, we deprive their fundamental goods to a certain extent. For example, in case of Australia, the past government deprived the fundamental goods of abortion. For example, in the past decade, we take away from those communities, children from those communities as the integration policy. But they can't sustain their lifestyle, manage to sustain their lifestyle. Well, that's why, for example, in case of India, 400 types of language is still existing. In these cases, they share, because their government support, they create the document or they create, then pass on their culture to other organizations. However, after this proposal, the logic is quite simple. They lose the vital avenue to intermediate their ways of thinking or their lifestyle through the language or etc. Simply because the government stops the fund or to creating those facilities, which is totally dependent on the necessity of the minority. In this case, what is going to happen? They rather deprive the incentive to integrate into the modern society because this proposal creates additional deprivation of the culture because government stops the subsidy or because government stops the facility faculty management, they cannot sustain their culture. Those sense of the segregation is causing, under the name of forced integration, the government deprives further fundamental goods of individual community. So in this case, they create the further segregation because they stop the children to go to the school or they stop to going to the town because they must try to pass on their culture by themselves or etc. That's why this proposal is counterproductive to cause towards mutual understanding. That's why we make the oppose. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The reality is that there's spectrum of minority and spectrum of majority when it comes to language. It's not that every single language is to the extent of the like only spoken by 2 people, etc. What we're going to bring you from side closing of government is we'll specify the target for you and talk to specifically what's going to happen with the population where they speak relatively minority language and excessively minority language. And that's what we're going to bring you from closing proposition. We're going to talk about 3 things by combining rebuttals with our extension. First, I'm going to talk about specification of the target. Who exactly are the people we're talking about? Because that was a big controversy in the opening house. Second, let's take a look at people who speak relatively minority language, such as people of Chinese Koreans or Haidas or Inuits. Third, I'm going to talk about people excessively minority language, which open up said, only 2 people speak the language. What is the effect on this population? So first, I want to ask specification target quickly. Obviously, there's a spectrum of language when it comes to number of speakers. For instance, case majority language, people excessively spoken, such as English, which is quite very obvious. Secondly, there's like moderately spoken language, such as Japanese or Chinese, etc. But when it comes to, there are 2 types of targets when it comes to minority. In terms of verse type, or relatively minority, which is like Chinese Koreans, etc. We say for these people, they're able to sustain the language by themselves, because we can never hear any kind of logic from opening up, why these people can never sustain the language by themselves. We say these people can for 3 reasons. Firstly, at their houses, we believe they're able to transcend the language to a certain extent, because grandmother or mother can often tell their children from young times of age to speak certain language. And since in this kind of time, it's much easier to digest the language, they're able to keep the language by themselves. Or secondly, in other communities, they often share the same custom or tradition, etc. They're able to pass down language. Opening up, already talk about dialects that exist in Japan, but we say further. First, in case of Chinese Koreans, as we pointed out in my point of information, after post-war, without the subsidy of Japan, they were able to sustain the language by themselves by gathering in case of their own community. Secondly, even in case of Haidas or Inuits, which is context of opening up position, we think they are able to sustain their language because certain number of population exists. For in case of Haida, which is the western part of Canada, they exist, where they create totem poles, etc. They have their own schools and own community, and their own teachers, which they speak their own language, ladies and gentlemen. We say that exists this mechanism without the state intervention. No, thank you. Secondly, even in case of like Inuits, which is northern part, like majority of like Inuits, already have adequate number of population. There are certain teachers which can speak their own language without subsidy. They're able to sustain by themselves. So, and more in case of Japanese Americans, we say these people without the subsidy in the United States, especially after war, when they had the hatred against Japanese people, they gathered themselves in their houses, they were able to do it. We say for those people, it's fine. But we accept a certain extent, forced target, which is accepting minorities, such as 2 people in Nepal. We say those people exist, but we say it's rather beneficial for these people in long run, which I'll explain in our third extension, first second level extension of people relatively minority. We say for these people, the problem we see is the state is deciding and adjudicating the type of language that these people should speak, ladies and gentlemen, because the state says this is a language, state defines a language for you. And that's how, one language, when they're going to put a label that one language more superior to another, or 2, people who are conservative traditional stick to these ideas, and teachers who are getting the fund will speak the traditional language and always transcend the language in that sense. And we say this is problematic, because language always changes based on the time. I'll further extend why this is the case. For instance, based on ideology or other cultures' influence, language always changes. No, thank you. Let's take a look at example of Japanese. The reason why, for example, hiragana and katakana has been used by male and female reflects the gender segregation that exists during that community. But after it has been integrated, both hiragana and katakana has been used by both people, shows the reflection changes of ideology against the stereotypical norm against male and female. Or in case of use of kanji, clearly shows the Chinese influence and how the language has changed. Or in case of romaji, shows the Western influence that existed and able to be used and how they have digested the language to a certain extent. The development of young languages, such as Gal languages, or even case Twitter or Nichano, where the specific language has been born, is because of reflection technology and number of populations that exist. Language always changes, but when the state is backed up, when the state says, this is a language, it hinders the development, and that's what we brought you on the closing proposition. Okay.
So, even in the state that so, state can follow the demand from certain community. If that community is try to change their language by themselves, the government can answer those offers.
It's contradictory with their stance at the end of the day, right? Because state decides what kind of language it is. Obviously, they'll stick with the language. It hinders development. You should listen to my speech. Tertiary level analysis of people who are excessive minority. We see for the moral obligation, it's about extent on practical benefit, whether it's going to benefit people or not. So I'll further explain how it's going to benefit. They opening up said this is going to force to let people change. Two responses. Firstly, we're not going to decide which language to speak by these communities. Obviously, these communities can decide which language to speak. Like lots of language that's available, right? It's not like only like just minority language versus English, right? There's spectrum language that exists. There's numerous number exists. People can change. Secondly, we say this change is especially gradual, ladies and gentlemen. It's not like when you suddenly cut off the language, these people suddenly lose a way to speak, ladies and gentlemen. Obviously, they can use gradually do it for next generation. For instance, for example, send their children to the mainstream education, ladies and gentlemen. Those kind of gradual change can happen. We say changes will happen, but it's fine. Moreover, we say this is going to lead to integration of these people. We say integration is much more important in these occasions. Why? Because integration will lead to more effective communication and increase the horizon of choices, diverse choices that exist for these people, rather than locking into one identity and one language in these occasions. First, in the case of getting jobs, ladies and gentlemen, it's much easier to get jobs when you change the language, rather than sticking to language, it's only spoken by two people, ladies and gentlemen. Who's going to be the boss and who's obviously, what's the chance that people is going to speak that language, unfortunately, in these occasions, right? And communication is vital when it comes to getting jobs. You have to follow order, you have to cooperate. That's why sometimes it's necessary to actually be able to speak certain level of language in order to get to jobs, which leads directly to the identity of these people. What kind of jobs they really want to get, or what kind of self-actualization these individuals want to do. Second is the practical level of daily life. It's much easier to communicate with other people, because eradicate xenophobia, ladies and gentlemen. Because when language is different, they have a high bar that this people is different from us. We eradicate that. These people are similar to us, do not deserve discrimination. That's why further is going to integrate. Ladies and gentlemen, we specify the targets for you, and for both targets, there's benefits. That's why we propose.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen. So the government side assumes, so without supporting language can sustain. But it's totally misunderstanding under the status quo situation or how the language living in our society, Mr. Speaker. Because if you see the language, you have to use it to work or living in the society. And if there is a common language or mainstreaming language exists, already in these kinds of situations, unfairness exists. So therefore we say, why under the current situation we are supporting these kinds of minority language is, by supporting them, we equalize the situation of the mainstream language and the minor language, and we allow the people to choose freely, which is really important for you, Mr. Speaker. And so therefore we say they totally misunderstand under the current situation, so therefore we are very proud to oppose this motion. So I have three issues to talk about. Firstly, why under the current situation the government tries to support these kinds of minority language, and why the people can choose freely under the current situation. And secondly, about the why after taking the proposal people cannot choose freely, and why it is an infringement of the human rights. No, thank you. So firstly, I want to engage what the previous speaker said. The previous speaker's interesting analysis is a Zainichi, Korean, or so forth. But the thing is, they have huge difficulty to sustain these kinds of Korean language or so forth. Only because they can do such kind of things is because they have certain number. Maybe there is a lot of people exist, and they have the capacity to make the schools or so forth. But, Mr. Speaker, you should not forget about the difficulty of these kinds of Zainichi Korean, Mr. Speaker. To sustain their culture, the Zainichi Korean have to spend a lot of money and have to waste a lot of money, have to use a lot of money, Mr. Speaker. In these kinds of situations, already such kinds of Zainichi Korean have the difficulty to sustain their language. And if you think about the more minority person, like the more minority culture, it is impossible because they do not have any monetary capacity to sustain their schools or so forth. So therefore we say his analysis doesn't stand because it is not a zero-sum game. There is a certain difficulty. It always exists. Even they can protect the language, Mr. Speaker. No, thank you. So I want to go my extension. No, thank you. So firstly, about the why under the current situation the government is supporting these kinds of minor language, Mr. Speaker. So why is that? Simply because the government assumption is under the current situation the forcing minor language is existing. So therefore we say we have to stop these kinds of forcing mechanisms. But they totally misunderstand about the situation because language is in this round consensus. The language is a very, very core part to sustain your lifestyle or to sustain your life, Mr. Speaker. To work, the language is necessary, or to gather money, the language is necessary, Mr. Speaker. In this kind of situation, there is a strong social pressure towards such kind of minority people exists because if they choose the minority language, they cannot sustain their lifestyle in this society, Mr. Speaker. In this kind of situation, actually, there is no free choice. There is a huge inequality between such kinds of choosing the minor language and choosing such kinds of majority language, Mr. Speaker. So therefore, we say to fix these kinds of to fix such kinds of strong social pressure under the current situation, we are subsidizing these kinds of minority culture and allow people to choose freely based on their demand. And so it means under the current situation, by subsidizing these kinds of minority language, if they really want to sustain their culture, they can choose it because of such kinds of subsidy, Mr. Speaker. Yes.
Okay. If there is such a strong social pressure which externally compels minority to choose mainstream language, if government gives subsidy to them, they have no other option but to choose mainstream language.
So the closing government also admit for the Zainichi Korean, the Korean language is so necessary and so core part of the identity, so therefore they spend money to protect these kinds of minority language. They admit language is important. The assumption coming from the government side is by letting market mechanism, the only good language is sustained. But the thing is, the demand exists under the status quo is already infringed by these kinds of strong social pressure, Mr. Speaker. So therefore we say to fix these kinds of social pressure, inequality exists in language, and we allow the people to choose freely. They totally misunderstood why under the status quo we are subsidize such kinds of things. And moreover we say, I want to engage one more analysis coming from the government side. Under the current situation, there is a no-force mechanism as exists. Because if they won't learn the main language, they can learn. Even the Aboriginal person or even the Inuit person, if they want to learn English, they can learn, Mr. Speaker. So therefore we say there is a free choice for them as exists because they compare to the benefit and harm coming from choosing the minority language, and they finally choosing the minority language. Why it is so bad? They never explain. Anyway, secondly, about the why after taking proposal, such kinds of people's choice is infringed, and why it is against the governmental role, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, after taking proposal, they cannot choose such kinds of minority language. Even if they want to protect their culture, even if they love their culture, they cannot wise it. Because as I said before, there is a strong social pressure, there is a strong structural pressure exists under the current situation, Mr. Speaker. Under these kinds of situation, the people forced to choose the mainstream culture, Mr. Speaker. And we say that is bad because as they admit, and also we pushing under the in this debate, the culture is important. Even the government side admit these kinds of things. So in this kind of situation, the governmental role is allow people to freely choose which is the really better for you, Mr. Speaker. So by subsidizing these kinds of minority culture, people can free from these kinds of social pressure or structural problem exist under the current situation, and they can really calculate benefit coming from the protecting their minority culture or the integrate to the society, and finally they are choosing these kinds of minority culture or minority language, Mr. Speaker, to allow people choose what is the better for you or what is the best for you. We should not take the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen in this house today. Well, I was expecting much more to come from the closing opposition, but basically what they have asserted in this place, in this model debate, was saying the repetition of the opening opposition, which was relatively covered. The free choice is necessary, and that's why we need subsidy. Well, that's exactly what the opening opposition said, and we've told you from the, Mr. Mogu-san, that this free choice itself has not been fully accomplished, right? Because these governments, by prioritizing certain types of value within that part of the community, for example, excessive minority, government is, there's highly likely tendency, so the government are likely to prioritize these traditional value of that particular languages, and thereby this free choice of these individuals to have this relatively liberal kind of language or this traditional way of language, that choice itself is seriously hindered, Mr. Speaker, and thereby we don't think this free choice of the individual in that particular community has not been accomplished in the first place, Mr. Speaker. Now, before moving on to some of this debate, I have one thing to point out again for the closing opposition, because they just knifed opening opposition, because what the rebuttal coming from Mr. Koki was saying, well, these Zainichi people could have survived, because we believe that these Zainichi people did not receive any subsidy from this Japanese state, right? Yeah. But the assumption of the thing coming from the opening opposition is to say, well, when you cut off all these subsidies, every culture are going to get destroyed. We don't think there's any consistency coming from this whole opposition side, because we never know if these community or these languages are going to die out, or whether these languages are going to sustain and have a happy ever after life, as the closing opposition had illustrated. No, thank you, Mr. Koki. All right. So, having destroyed closing opposition, I'm going to anticipate more to come up from with speaker in closing opposition. Alright, two things to sum up. First, I'm going to talk about what exactly is subsidy. Second, I'm going to talk about what exactly is dying languages. Alright, the opening government side has done quite a good job of illustrating but how this government doesn't have this authority to actually justify one particular language is actually absolutely good. And they have also illustrated how people are changing in terms of the culture, right? How people are changing, actually wanting to integrate to the mainstream community, Mr. Speaker. But we talked about from the closing government side, the main character in this debate are those minority groups of people who are dying by, who are suffering on their, suffering on their culture. Because the target in this debate are these minority groups of people which exist in the current society, right? And there are a lot of the needs other than these languages which consistently come from the opposition side. Because the opening opposition came up and talked about language has this major proportion to actually major portion to actually what exactly the culture is. But Mr. Speaker, what we have told you from the closing government side is that there are more things which might be important for these particular groups of people. For example, 2 people who are living in the mountain of Nepal, right? These people have more than to actually sustain their own culture in the first place, Mr. Speaker. And that's exactly the reason why, Mogu-san talked about these relatively minority and excessive minority groups of people. Because we still can transcend their own language through their private houses, right? That's why how Nikkei people still have bilingual language, both Japanese and English. They share the both values of their American westernized value and these Japanese values. Right? No, thank you. And thereby, we believe this is essentially okay, or essentially possible, practically possible to actually transcend for these mothers, parents, grandmothers to transcend their children, because they used to have books in the bookshelf where they can still tell the stories of their ancestors, right? We believe we can't see any reason why we cannot sustain and transcend one particular language within, no thank you later please, within their own private houses and houses. Alright, also we talked about how these excessively minority groups of people, the opening opposition assumed by actually cutting out all these subsidies, killed and destroyed these culture of these excessively minority groups of people. No thank you. But what my partner had actually brought up in this debate is that there are this opening opposition assumption further isolates these excessively minority groups of people from the society, which they are actually going to suffer more, Mr. Speaker. Because we would protect these minority groups of people in the basis on this ground, on this debate, Mr. Speaker, right? Well, thank you. Because there are still demand, right? Because by actually protecting one particular traditional languages, then these people loses the way to actually see in the particular society that we're actually integrate with other tribes which might share the similar values or similar languages on their neighbors and in the villages and so forth, Mr. Speaker. That's why we believe to actually culturally integrate, and that's exactly why it's going to lead to my second point. What exactly is a dying language? The language actually evolves and actually language develops in terms of time and time. Yes, so
outside of your home, the all people speaking mainstream language. In this kind of situation, how can you transcend your mother language to your children? Because outside your society, It's fulfilled.
You have to actually analyze who we are talking about, right? That's exactly the reason why Mr. Mokusan has specified like certain types of characters, right? For example, in the case of like Hairu or like Zainichi people, they still have like adequate amount of resources or humanitarian resources to actually transcend their own language or values. And we like, other than like engaging to our point, why like telling it, right? Well, like if that's the case, like you can have like Nikkei people in like Hawaii, right? Because they still speak like both like Japanese and English. No, thank you. Like we can see why. Like you cannot like transcend your language. And like your mother speaks English, you might speak English. Your mother speaks like Aboriginal like language. Your children are likely to speak Aboriginal language. Like engagement, right? Cool. All right. So what exactly is a dying language, right? All right. So Mr. Speaker. Well, what my Mokusan had like clearly talked about were like a couple of like very intelligent things. Because language actually evolves and alters. Because but when the state actually intervenes and actually like puts certain value that this particular like traditional language is the core to that traditional tribes or these like people in the particular community, that actually hinders the development of the language. Because we talked about a lot of things, right? For example, in the case of a religion, like in the case of like Protestant, like there are many branches that are coming through from these religions evolving by actually the changes of the time, and that actually like changes. And like that actually represents what exactly the perception of the community is, what exactly the value of the language in that tribe or community is, Mr. Speaker. And that's exactly the reason why, like we like talked about like in the case of like hiragana, katakana in terms of like gender segregation or kanji, the influence of Chinese like languages or like Roman like letters from like Western influences. And we talked about like Nichan or like gangsters like language or these slangs that these like young people actually use. Those are essentially necessary to actually sustain the culture of these particular community groups of people, and thereby, Mr. Speaker, by actually subsidizing and trying to like excessively protect these minority groups of people are going to rather hinder that these cultural like innovation of these language innovation, and they're going to like end up by actually suffering in terms of like segregating from the culture within the society, Mr. Speaker. What we need and what we have to realize, the reality is that there are more things that these people are demanding. The more things that which are necessary for these people to actually sustain their own selves, Mr. Speaker. And thereby we're very much proud to propose the motion. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, saying that he doesn't understand our extension should not count as an engagement with our extension, right? We think this is a poor growth movement on the part of government whip to say that just because he doesn't understand our extension, then he should not engage with our extension, right? We told you clearly how, Mr. Speaker, the government subsidy is necessary to create a level playing field, because in the status quo, we don't think people are making like genuinely free choice of their own accord as to which language they support, Mr. Speaker. In order to create this fairness between the major language and minor languages, we think the government subsidy or intervention is necessary so that people can make genuinely free choice, Mr. Speaker. And that's what we told you from the extension, which was never responded to by the side of the House. Having said that, I'm going to examine two issues. Firstly, I'm going to talk about the principle as to whether or not the government should let language die. Secondly, I'm going to talk about the practical consequences which was presented by both sides of the House. So firstly, let's start with the principle, Mr. Speaker. Now, the OG said, the demand is changing in terms of languages, and therefore, Mr. Speaker, we are forcing people to speak minor languages against their will and against their choice, and therefore, they talks about, for example, the harm as to division and also identity crisis which occurs in the status quo, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the underlying premise on which the OG built the entire case is that, Mr. Speaker, we are forcing these people, we are swaying these people significantly by government intervention, Mr. Speaker, to speak the minor languages against the will and against their choice, Mr. Speaker. Now, in response to this, the DLO touched on the idea that actually we are providing options, not forcing these people to speak minor language. And what we provided to you from the closing opposition with regards to these issues is deep in this analysis, right? Because we told you, Mr. Speaker, clearly how the subsidy is necessary, Mr. Speaker, to create a situation where people can make genuinely free choice, meaning that we are establishing a level playing field between major languages and minor languages, which can only be provided with the government intervention, which cannot exist, Mr. Speaker, with the status quo without the government intervention, Mr. Speaker, because it told you about the fact that how, Mr. Speaker, without the government intervention, without government assistance, the people will have significant pressure to speak the major languages in terms of, for example, the possibility to get a job, possibility to gain economic upliftment, Mr. Speaker, or, for example, the newspapers, things like that are all down in major languages, right? And therefore, Mr. Speaker, to counter this pressure, to create situation where people can make free choice, Mr. Speaker, truly according to their will, the government service is necessary because the government is only actor in this instance to create a level playing field between major and minor languages, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, we are not forcing these people, right? We are just maintaining the right balance, Mr. Speaker, because in the status without government intervention, we cannot create this balance. There is a power imbalance between the major and minor languages, and therefore, we are not swaying these people against the balance. We are creating balance because we cannot have the balance without the government intervention, Mr. Speaker, and therefore, we are rather creating a better situation and the best, most desirable situation for the people who live in the minority communities, and that is why, Mr. Speaker, the bulk of their case, or the premise of the entire case doesn't stand, Mr. Speaker, and therefore, we don't think they have the significant enough case. Now, let me engage further with the closing government, Mr. Speaker. The closing government, in the second part of extension, told us how we are defining, Mr. Speaker, like what kind of language people should speak. I have two responses. First, Mr. Speaker, we are okay with this to a certain extent, encouraging people to speak minor languages, because without this, Mr. Speaker, the people are forced to speak major languages, and therefore, empowering minor language to a certain extent is rather beneficial and desirable. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, my point I clearly told you in response to the Morgan Stanley analysis, Mr. Speaker, how people can choose to speak major language, even in the status, even under our model, if they really want, Mr. Speaker. Just like we speak both Japanese and English, Mr. Speaker, we think those people can choose to speak major language like English, Mr. Speaker. And even if that is not the case, there's a solution. It's not to deny this motion, right? To propose this motion, right? The solution is to provide better education of major language, right? And even though people cannot have access to enough major language education, that cannot be the reason to propose this motion. Rather, that's a reason to seek the better alternative, right? And that is for those two comprehensive reasons. The second extension doesn't stand. With regards to the last and third extension, Mr. Speaker, about how people are gradually going to change, I think this is further emphasizing the benefit coming from the opening government. We say, Mr. Speaker, the benefit or harm can be adjudicated by the people themselves, right? The minor and ethnic group themselves, Mr. Speaker, and therefore we should make the situation where they can equally and fairly compare the benefits and harms of speaking certain language, and that the exact situation we are going to provide on closing opposition, and that is why, for those reasons, the bulk of extension doesn't stand. I'll take the point from closing.
Okay, if states subsidize a particular language, you label the language that's been spoken is a language that's been spoken. Don't you think this is going to relatively weaken the movement to innovate?
First of all, I think labeling is too extreme. We are encouraging and empowering to a certain extent. We told you how that is fine, and therefore we think that's basically the answer to the appeal. Right? So having said, I'm going to move on to a second point, which is about the practical consequences, Mr. Speaker. Now, the closing government told us in the first part of extension how they are moderate and relative minority, aside from the excessive minority, right? Now, I have two responses. First of all, my opponent told you how, Mr. Speaker, there's difficulty, even in the case of damaged Korea or relative minority, Mr. Speaker. And what this difficulty suggests is that even though people like Danish Korean can sustain their language to a certain extent, Mr. Speaker, the level of language sufficiency is going to decline significantly, right? Even though they can sustain the language still, Mr. Speaker, the level is going to decline significantly. For example, they might be able to speak a few words, but however, for example, they cannot transcend their cultural narratives. So, for example, they cannot transcend the important part of history by the language, right? And therefore, the declining level itself is harmful, even if they can sustain the language itself, Mr. Speaker. For example, even if they can speak 100 or 200 words. But secondly, Mr. Speaker, what this suggests is that in the case of extreme minor group like Inuit, we think for those people, it is entirely impossible for them to sustain their language because they cannot have the money to provide school teachers, right? And for those two reasons, we don't think the first extension supports the case, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, again, Mr. Speaker, the reason why our extension is the most important consideration in today's debate is because, Mr. Speaker, the benefit coming from the affirmative is predicated upon the assumption that those benefits, for example, integration with the majority, or, Mr. Speaker, solving conflict is desired by the minority, right, Mr. Speaker? Or the benefit of speaking the major language is desired or chosen by the minority. But we told you how that will not be the case, Mr. Speaker, without the government intervention. With the government intervention, rather, I told you repeatedly, Mr. Speaker, consistently, we are creating this situation where people can choose. And if they see the benefit the government talks about, they can seek the benefit with our model in the status quo, Mr. Speaker. But there are certain people who still want to maintain the minor language rather than all the benefit they talks about with regards to speaking major language. And if that is the case, we should let these people decide, Mr. Speaker. If that is the case, we should let these people choose. And that is exactly the reason why, Mr. Speaker, we should let these people choose themselves, because they are the ones who know about themselves most, Mr. Speaker, and therefore that's the benefit we told you from closing opposition. Now, lastly, we told you in our last part of extension, we also told you about what is going to happen in the after plan. Because of this pressure, most of languages are going to die out in the case of excessive minority. But secondly, even in the case of relative minority, which the causing government wanted to talk about, Mr. Speaker, as I said, the level of language is going to significant decline because my partner told you there's significant pressure from the major language toward those minority ethnic groups, right? As I illustrated with regards to newspaper or job, etc. And that is why they are going to suffer a lot, Mr. Speaker, in the plan, and that is why we don't think we should take this proposal for those loads of reasons to be extremely proud of, course.